Hi, I'm Dr. Shiva Guide. I'm a clinical psychologist specialized in PTSD, trauma, anxiety, and mood disorders. And I'm here today with Taylor Winston. We are both survivors of the Las Vegas massacre that occurred on October 1st, 2017. And we're putting together a series of videos to go along and complement the documents that I've written over the past year for the community, for folks who maybe learn better by watching video instead of reading. And
Guilty.
like all the other videos, what I will say is watch the video, and then if you'd like more detail or you can't remember a term or you want to have a more detailed explanation, then refer back to the documents on route91therapy.com, or you can also take a look at the book that's coming out in another week or so. Okay, so today we're going to talk about sleep and nightmares. What do you think about that?
Well, personally, I've had trouble sleeping and, revisited that night in my dreams, which then become nightmares and so on and so forth. And I know a lot of other people have, and I guess what's it all about and maybe how can we address it and understand it a little better?
Okay, so it's a great question. Sleep disturbance is often the first thing that we notice when people start developing depression or anxiety or trauma. Sleep problems and nightmares don't always go together, which is why if you refer to our documents online, you'll notice it's two separate documents, but just for efficiency, we've decided to put these together as a topic for discussion for the video today. So there are some basic sleep hygiene and just sleep cognitive behavioral therapy guidelines that I like to teach all of my patients. And before we get into those, let me just explain the different parts of sleep when we talk about sleep problems. Because again, some people may have had sleep problems prior to Route 91. And it's always, and I've written this kind of on the lower side over there by Taylor, it's always a good idea to see your doctor and make sure that you've ruled out for sleep apnea or any other kind of sleep disorders when you're talking about this sort of care. And remember, ultimately, if you do get into therapy for sleep problems or insomnia or nightmares, the long-term goal is to get off of your sleep medications. But please don't stop taking them cold turkey after watching this video. Please consult your psychiatrist or your primary care provider because it's never a good idea to go off those psychotropics, those medications that are working on all of your neurochemicals in your brain. It's never a good idea to just go off those overnight. Some of those create some really, really gnarly long-term effects. So when we're talking about sleep, there are three things that sort of contribute to sleep problems. The first one is called predisposing factors. Predisposing factors are these biological genetic things that just contribute to sleep problems. And so often when we talk about this in my groups, I ask my patients if insomnia runs in their family. So I'm going to ask you the same thing. Does insomnia run in your family, Taylor?
No, it does not.
Okay, so that's a good thing to know.
Yeah.
Because and have you ever had insomnia before?
No, I have not.
Okay, so that's a really, really good baseline to understand, okay, no, this doesn't run in my family, or maybe it does run in my family. And also to recognize if you had problems with sleep before Route 91 or now it's just starting to crop up. The second thing then that can take form is something we call precipitating factors. And that's just life, right? That's like, I shouldn't call Route 91 life, or what had the Las Vegas massacre.
Things happen.
Things happen. Precipitating factors are all of these factors or things in life, whether they are traumatic or not, that may lead us to start not sleeping at night. What are some things you can think of that might cause us to just start having problems sleeping?
Just, for instance, thoughts of that night.
Yeah.
Maybe some triggers that we hear, or some lights, or maybe there's a siren that goes by or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And as it turns out, sleep is really, really sensitive to whatever we're talking about beforehand, or triggers, or things like watching the news. Anything that happens during the day can manifest in your sleep and also in your nightmares. So Precipitating factors are also other things, though, Taylor, not necessarily traumatic. So if you're worried about like your next rent check bouncing, do you think you might lose some sleep over that?
You may, if you are financially in that position. It definitely.
Absolutely. It might cause you stress, right? What about if you have a fight with your girlfriend? Do you think that might cause you some sleepless nights?
Definitely.
Yeah, and especially in the area of interpersonal relationships, right? We are social beings, and so we are just hardwired to really want to connect with other people, and that can be a really huge source of distress when we're having problems.
Yeah.
So there are health issues. Do you think if you find out that somebody you love has cancer, that might cause you some sleepless nights?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So clearly there are these precipitating factors, and that really falls into the area of things we can't control. And unfortunately, the Las Vegas massacre was one of those things, obviously on the far end, sort of severe nature of precipitating factors. So those two things we don't really have too much control over. But here's the third problem that actually we have a lot of control over. And these we call the perpetuating factors that start to contribute to sleep problems. Because what happens when you haven't slept for a few nights?
Your body will automatically make you sleep at some point, or you'll start
And
to become
so
unhealthy.
you think you might take a nap?
You'll definitely try.
Yeah, yeah, and napping,
Over and over.
if you have sleep problems, napping is the number one. Do not do it. No napping. So napping can be very, very problematic. Napping interferes with our circadian rhythm. I won't get into all the fun, nerdy details that I do with my patients necessarily, but needless to say, as we are building up this adenosine, which is your sleepiness chemical, napping actually reduces it. So if you imagine sleep is like a balloon that you need to blow up, and it has to be as big as possible at the end of the night in order for you to be able to fall asleep well and have a solid amount of sleep, uninterrupted sleep, then every time you take a nap, right, the balloon just shrinks down. Also, having stimulants, right? That Red Bull in the afternoon, or that Monster or Rockstar in the afternoon, that can also, the caffeine binds to the adenosine receptors. It fakes your body out into thinking you're not as tired as you are. So all of that interferes with your circadian rhythm. And there you have it. I guess I nerded out after all. The next thing is, in your bed, you only get to do two things. What are they?
Sleep and sex.
Yes, sleep and sex. Only sleep and sex in bed, folks, if you have sleep problems. Obviously, if you don't have sleep problems, you can do whatever you want. But if you have sleep problems, only sex and sleep in bed. Now, you can have sex in other places, but only sex and sleep in bed, because we want the bed to cue you for sleep. We want your brain to recognize when you're going to your bed that, oh, it's sleepy time. So that means don't do all these other things in bed. What are some other things people tend to do in bed?
Working in bed, eating, watching TV.
Playing video games. Talking on the phone,
Yep.
reading the newspaper, reading a book. Absolutely. And we don't want to do any of those things in bed, because it's essentially, remember that learning that we learned about with Pavlov and his dogs?
Yep.
What was that called?
Creating stimulus and a rhythm.
And it's conditioned learning.
Conditioning yourself to that response.
That's exactly right. So we're learning to respond in a certain way. And so when we start to engage in these unhealthy behaviors, they become perpetuating, and they keep making the problem worse. And they can take on a life of their own, that now our sleep problems really have nothing to do with the precipitating factor that initially caused them. So the other thing is, we don't want to be in bed any more than 15 minutes. So Taylor, don't stare at the clock counting down 15 minutes, because that's going to stress you out.
Yeah.
So just roughly, imagine, okay, I think it's been 10 or 15 minutes. I'm not asleep. I'm wide awake. I'm wired. I'm feeling totally, hyper aroused, not in a good way. And I want you to get out of bed, right? Because we don't want our brain to learn that you do anything else in bed. Also, a really important thing that often we really screw up is we sleep in on the weekends when you're tired during the week. Sleeping in is just, it is death to your circadian rhythm. So the best thing is to wake up at the same time every single day. Yes, that means, and I have a lot of patients in the military, and they get up at 4 in the morning. Yeah. And so they hate me when I tell them, I want you to get up at 4 a.m. on a Saturday and Sunday as well, right? I don't know how many of them actually do it, but that's what I tell them to do, because we want to set that same, we always reestablish our baseline, and we always get our sleep back by anchoring the morning wake-up time. Not by saying, oh, I'm going to get in bed 2 hours early the night before. Why do you think that's a problem?
You may get up 2 hours early if you go to bed early.
And do you think you're always going to fall asleep just because you say, I'm going to get in bed 2 hours early? Probably you're going to be counting sheep for 2 hours, right? And that is the opposite of what we're trying to do. What about stimulants?
I don't know what those are.
That means like caffeine and nicotine. Oh. So smoking cigarettes or e-cigarettes or anything, any kind of stimulating chemical.
Okay. So like avoid Red Bull and Monster or coffee throughout the day?
How long before sleep do you think we'd want to avoid those?
At least 4 to 6 hours. Okay,
that's a great guess, but I'm going to actually kind of wow you and tell you a lot longer than that. So because us scientists are kind of nerdy, there's a thing called half-life. And so caffeine and nicotine and other stimulants, that means drugs too, but let's stick to caffeine and nicotine. They have a half-life of 6 hours. What that means is after 6 hours, half of that chemical substance is still in your bloodstream. So what does that mean? It means it takes 10 to 12 hours on average for all of that chemical stimulant to exit your bloodstream, right? So if you have caffeine, a lot of caffeine at 6 p.m., yep. It's not out of your body until 6 a.m., right?
At minimum.
Yeah, and
depending on how much you had.
Sure, and it doesn't mean that we can't train ourselves to sleep after a big cup of coffee or a Red Bull. It just means we may not be getting a really good quality of sleep. So we really want to watch that. Also, again, not making me very popular, but alcohol and drugs. Right? They really impair our sleep. And alcohol does something very interesting to our nightmares, so maybe now's a good time to talk about that, because I can tell you a lot of my patients and other people I talk to have a nightmare. The next day they're worried they're going to have another nightmare, so let me have a drink, it'll relax me, and then maybe I won't have a nightmare. And there's a problem with that, because there's a rebound effect when we have alcohol that extends, it prolongs REM sleep. That's your rapid eye movements sleep stage in the second part of sleep. And so what happens is because 90% or more of our dreaming and nightmares happens in that REM stage, when you drink or use drugs, you give yourself more opportunities for nightmares. And because it's also diuretic, you get up, you're thirsty, you have to drink water, it can cause a lot of disruption to your sleep. So you're also increasing the chances you'll get up and you'll remember your nightmares and your bad dreams. And remember, we all dream, but you're not usually going to remember your dreams unless you wake up in REM or right after REM, right? So we just generally want to stay away from that. Exercise is really important. We release endorphins, we release norepinephrine, we release dopamine, all of these wonderful chemicals that kill pain, right? Not just physical pain, but also psychological pain, and make us happy, right? Dopamine's our happy chemical. And then we know what norepinephrine and epinephrine are, right? When you jump out of an airplane, which I have a feeling you've done before.
A couple times.
Yeah, you get a little boost. It's that sort of exciting, kind of, oh my God, right? You get on a roller coaster, you go bungee jumping. Bungee jumping is not on my bucket list, but skydiving is. But that's that chemical. And so daily exercise is really, really good for us. And we're animals, so we're supposed to be tired out at the end of the day. We're hunters, we're gatherers, right? But just make sure you're not exercising within a few hours of bedtime. Unless you're an Olympic athlete or somebody who's really, really, really athletic, your heart rate takes a few hours to come down. And that's probably the rest of us. I mean, you're athletic, I'm athletic, but we're probably not Olympic athletic level. And so our heart rates take 2-3 hours to come down. So just make sure you're not exercising right before bedtime. Diet. Probably not a good idea to have a big greasy plate of delicious high salt, high fat lasagna. As much as we love it, probably not the best food before you go to bed, because after you eat, 60% of your blood supply is going to your gastrointestinal. That means all those arteries and all of that, that area that's digesting that food. And it's a lot of work for your body to do that. So kind of eating simpler at the end of the day, that can also help your sleep. Have you noticed on days that you maybe drink a lot at night, you're out partying, you have some pretty terrible food that's not very nutritious, you have some alcohol, and you maybe don't feel very good in the morning and you don't sleep so well? Have you noticed that before?
I've experienced that a few times in my life.
Haven't we all? Okay, so trying not to incriminate myself or Taylor here, but the reality is that we've all done it.
I've had a hangover before.
So relaxation. There are wonderful meditative apps, things like on Breathe to Relax, Headspace, Calm, some wonderful apps you can download on your phone that can walk you through a breathing mindfulness exercise that lasts anywhere from a few minutes all the way to maybe 15, 20 minutes of a pleasant imagery. And we actually practice that in our Nightmares group as a precursor to doing our imaginal rescripting or imagery rehearsal therapy. And so learning to do more relaxing activities. I would not recommend you do your taxes before you go to bed. I would not recommend you call your in-laws or people that you maybe don't have good relationships with, not to be presumptuous about that, but probably not a good time to have an argument or talk about something serious with your spouse. Leave that for the next morning. Also, there's new research that maybe we should be limiting our electronics, just keeping all of those devices at least within 5 feet or more away from our brains, because there's some hypotheses that might disrupt our brain waves and that might impact sleep negatively. So that's kind of the long and short of sleep. Taylor, what do you think about that? Are you guilty of some of these things?
I'm guilty of a few of them and stuff, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's just gonna go back to teaching myself that some triggers, may not be the lion, and then that'll
Yeah.
help me, have a more positive thought throughout the day to then hopefully get more rest.
Absolutely, and I know this isn't fun because sometimes basically what this means is you have to rearrange your furniture, so get the television out of the bedroom. You want your sleep space to be your zen, your, haven of relaxation. And we, over time, especially if you have trauma, or if you've had insomnia for a long time, you have most likely developed a very negative relationship with your bed. And then you have all these conditioned, learned responses, which would be kind of the fourth thing under here next to perpetuating. And like I said before, it can take on a life of its own. And that kind of leads us into a quick discussion of nightmares. Nightmares can be very common within the months following a traumatic experience. I know I had a few, often themes of death, a couple of massacre nightmares that were just simply awful. I'm sure that you have had your fair share.
I have.
The danger of having nightmares that then become recurrent, and they can do that sometimes because of the way that we're thinking during the day, and then when we start really cringing on our way to the bed, and then our anxiety goes up because we keep thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have a nightmare, it can just become this vicious cycle, almost this negative feedback loop. So it's really important when you do have a massacre nightmare or another type of death, probably death-themed nightmare, that in the morning you just remind yourself to get grounded. This is just a nightmare. It doesn't mean anything. I've been through something awful. And these kinds of compassionate thoughts that you can tell yourself. So one of the treatments, and this is definitely, I have to say, this is just a very Cliff Note version that I'll give you a few sentences kind of as an explanation, and it does not substitute going and seeing a therapist who can actually do sleep CBT, or we call it CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or for nightmares, imaginal rescripting therapy or imagery rehearsal therapy. There are two names for that. This won't substitute that, but it'll give you an idea that there are treatments out there. All of these things are highly treatable, and it's really important for you to remember that. So for nightmares, here's kind of the long and short of it. If you have a nightmare at least a couple times a week and it's the same story, same theme, what I'll have you do is write it out but change the ending. or change the hot spots. Hot spots are those really scary parts that maybe are the ones that you wake up and find yourself having panic symptoms. What we're going to do is rewrite those. And this is a tough one because my patients often say, so Dr. G, you want me to lie to myself because this isn't what really happened. And the dreams are based on actual events. I understand that, but it's your dream, you get to change it. So in a way, like pleasant imagery, we're creating a new story. And the idea is that you write that story over and over again and you read it to yourself a few times a day, and it will probably seep into your nightmares. And I can tell you, having run these groups with my patients who have very severe nightmares, that within even as short of a time span as 1 week, they have had changes in their nightmares. Some of them have even said that on occasion I visit them in their nightmare saying, don't forget the rules, why are you here, why are you thinking like this? Those sorts of things. So it's amazing the impact that our daytime thinking can have on us and our nightmares, but it's really important because it should be empowering to know that you can actually do something to change them. And so what I would recommend is that if you want any further details or explanation on any of these things, refer back to the documents that we've written on both of these. Taylor, did you have any more questions about either of these issues?
I think you covered pretty much everything that I had questions on.
Okay. So hopefully at least now you understand and our audience understands that these are highly treatable issues and we don't have to be scared by our nightmares. Instead, kind of reacting by embracing them and sitting with them and learning to tolerate them and just understanding that they don't necessarily mean anything. They don't mean that we're going to be sick forever. They don't mean we're not going to sleep ever again. They just are a manifestation of how we're feeling, and maybe just pay attention a little bit more the next day to how much self-care you do, how your thinking is it logical, rational, helpful, or is it not? And maybe a good time to reach out, get some hugs, talk to some friends, get some extra sleep, but not napping, and that sort of thing. So hopefully you have a better understanding of sleep problems, things that can make it worse, things that you can change, also maybe a new way to think about your nightmares. If you want more details, please feel free to access our website or my book that will be coming out. And tune in for some of the other videos. Thank you. Thanks, Taylor.